We are live, sir.
A very good evening, Mr. Praveen, and to Vyapar Jagat and the viewers of Vyapar Jagat. This is Sandeep Goswami. I am the CEO of Sandeep Goswami and Associates, and I have been invited to talk about one of the most topical subject of today, that is climate science. And what I offer is climate science as a sustainability service, which is in line with what the Prime Minister had initiated in 2021 Mission Life. The first chapter I will introduce is why climate science as a sustainability service is required. So in 2021, the Prime Minister at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP26, had said that to bring individual behaviors at the forefront of the global climate action narrative, the Prime Minister's mantra is Mission Life, lifestyle for environment. It connects the powers of the people for the protection of this earth and teaches them to utilize in a better way Mission Life. Then cut to 2022, when we come down to Sharm el-Sheikh, another main thing came up, and that is the creating of a global shield against climate risk. And in this year, the Antonio Guterres, who is the United Nations Secretary General, said that all people on Earth must be protected by early warning systems within the next 5 years. If you would look at the Reserve Bank of India, the Reserve Bank of India also had said in January 2023 that the RBI is moving closer towards ring fencing the banking system from credit losses, and it proposes to move from provisioning on the principles of expected losses from incurred losses. The move would be over a period of 5 years, the RBI said in the discussion paper. Chapter 2, what are the evidence of climate change? Let us look at the evidence of climate change. What you see over here is a graph, and in this graph, what you will see is that the different kind of event that has happened is the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction as mapped, and it shows that in a 20-year period between 1980 to 1999, we had 1,389 floods, while in 2000 to 2019, we had 3,254 floods. Storms also increased exponentially. And as you can see, from earthquakes to volcanic activities to wildfire, everything has increased exponentially, which is proving that there is a climate change, and climate change is bringing in more and more natural disasters to occur more frequently. And that is further changing when we are looking at the next 20-year period. And if you average the last 20-year period from 2000 to 2019, the per annum disasters were 368. But in 2020 alone, we had 389 disasters that came up. If you would look at the natural disaster, how it is costing us, it has cost us in 2021 280 billion worldwide. The cost of disasters, as you can see, has come from economic losses, which has crossed or nearly 600 billion, and insured losses, which are also close to 100 billion and more. The number of people who are affected just from floods alone in 2020, from 2001 to 2020, is 82.7 million people. 67.5 million people have been affected by drought. From storms, you had 37.4 million people. And the economic losses in only 2021 has been over $280 billion. How much of that 280 billion has India suffered? If you would just look at from 2019, both the East Coast and the West Coast are getting continuously hammered by climate change induced cyclones. We had in 2019 Cyclone Vayu, which had a damage of $1.4 million. Then we had Cyclone Fani, which brought in $8.5 billion of damage. In 2020, we had Cyclone Nisarga hitting the West Coast, causing a $665 million change, and Cyclone Amphan, which took away $13.5 billion in losses. 2021 again, We had a damage through cyclone Taukte of 2.1 billion, and Yaas took away 2.76 billion. We had a relief last year, but then again this year, both sides, we have seen the cyclones coming in, while as the east cyclone Mocha went towards Bangladesh, what we had unfortunately is cyclone Biprojoy, which came in and hit us on 14th of June and between 14th to 15th of June. The loss and damage has not yet been published, but it was also a very severe cyclone. So as you can see, loss of life, loss of property, all these things are happening even in India. Now, what are the mitigation and adaptations which we can do to overcome climate change? Currently, not many investors, lenders, and insurers have a clear view of which companies will endure or even flourish as the environment changes and which companies are likely to struggle. Without reliable climate-related design and build information, businesses and industry cannot price climate-related risks and opportunities correctly. Since catastrophic risk can threaten a company's financial well-being, understanding and owning this risk requires knowing both the likelihood of high loss years and the biodiversity of events that could produce such losses. Climate science as a sustainability service related to asset and financial risk, that is in short we call it CSAS, can provide real-time and future analysis of various climate risks and advise the mitigation and adaptation thereof. So before we can understand what are the mitigation and adaptation, one needs to map the risks to provide those solutions. So through our satellites, our company, in our partnership, we have our own satellites and we have the international data with us. As you can see, the Indian climate disasters risk map where cyclone, flood, drought, hot desert and frigid deserts are mapped. We are taking only just looking at Gujarat. We can see the areas which have been identified for earthquake, areas that have been identified for cyclone, areas that have been identified for tsunami, and the areas that have been identified for floods. Now, if you would just look at June 14, you can see how the whole globe, how it was heating up. You can see wherever there is hot and the blue are cold. So we all know that cold air will rush towards hot air. And that is how the cyclones are built. And if you can look at the close to Gujarat, here there was cold air and the hot air was already created. It was a recipe for disaster. And you could see the cyclone over here, the red dot, which was being built, while there was another cyclone that was hitting the Philippines and China, in South China Sea. Now, how to address it? Most of the people who do ESG understand that they have to reduce the hazard, they have to reduce the vulnerability, and they have to reduce the exposure. And how to reduce it? So we have to essentially, when we look at this, we start at the initial state of risk and we bring it down to the extent possible. But there is a limit to this adaptation. Now, why is the limit? The limits can be physical. Now, if there is a city which is close to the coast, you cannot pick it up and move away. Nobody can do that. So there is a physical problem. There's an ecological problem also. If we have cut away the trees and everything, they are not going to grow back. If you have taken away the mangrove, they are not going to come back in one day. There are economic problems. Cost is also an imperative, which sometimes create problems. There are political problems, institutional problems, psychological and socio-cultural problems. But at our company, in Sandeep Goswami and Associates, what we said is that what if we can use the technology to initiate from the limits of adaptation and make it much more better. So how do we do that? What we do is we incorporate cutting-edge geoscience measurement and reporting and incorporate it into the city building master planning or the business supply chain and provide advanced warning to its users. It is based on real-time and near-accurate futuristic data coupled with a good understanding of innovative building and construction technology and integrated energy efficiency management. So what do? We explore the hazards, we assess the vulnerability and the risks. Hydrometric, it means we can talk about rainfall, snowfall or drought, temperature, heat wave or cold wave. Atmospheric, it means cyclone or tornadoes. Geological, we can talk about sea level rise, we can talk about riverine floods, we can talk about flash floods, we can talk about landslides, we can talk about sinkholes, we can also talk about earthquakes. Cosmic is usually meant for very high-end people who are into satellite and telecommunication, and we are able to tell them whether there is going to be an EMP flare which can take away telecommunication and it can create problems. So once we understand that, we investigate what kind of options are required to take care of it. Then we create the priority and the plan, the whole place. And then we look at actions which are based on ESG, which is climate management services, environment and sustainability services. And when you put this into action, there is a low cost of money because the borrowings become cheaper. All the banks based in India or anywhere by law brings the cost down when you are going for sustainability and sustainable actions. What is the accuracy of our measurements? We with our satellites can do 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer, and we can bring it down to 100 meter by 100 meter. That means our satellites can zoom in to your residence or your factory or your park or your school, whichever area you want, we can measure it. It can be an existing building, or even if somebody wants to buy a set piece of land or has an agricultural field and wants to know what can be the risks over there, we can zoom into their particular land and talk about it. Not only 100 kilometers, bring it down to even 100 meters. That is how we can do it. And what we tell you, there is no point talking to you about what has happened in the past. Nobody wants to know what has happened till May of this year. We all know about it. What you want to know would be what is going to happen in July to December and what can happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, or 50 years into the future. We can do that. We can bring it to the zone as we talked about, or we can bring it to the as a district or an area. We can talk about a whole area or a whole state, or bring it down to the client's asset. These are the certain samples which we have done. As we talked about CME risk. This is when the solar flares come in, an electromagnetic pulse falls onto Earth and it disrupts electric and internet communications. If we know where it is going to impact, we know that that country, that area is going to be impacted, and banking and other telecommunication service at that time, they can avoid this risk by knowing about it beforehand. We can identify a cyclone, the path of the cyclone, where it will hit. We can identify how much of water it can drop in and how soon a river will flood, whether it is going to, depending on the amount of rainfall that is happening. We can identify the areas of a city. We can identify which areas of that city will flood, as you can see, because usually when a city is built, we have definitely filled up some ponds and other areas, and those are the areas which can be risk zone that can be identified. If you are making new projects next to rivers, we can simulate the river, and if we do find that there is a risk of a riverine flooding, the buildings or the assets, you can come to know even at your planning level that these are the assets that can be damaged, and then you can replan it and therefore avoid those risks and save a lot of money. Existing buildings, we can pinpoint which buildings will be in risk for cyclones or flood or sea level rise. We can also measure how much. So for insurances or for any other purposes, whether you want to build it, whether there is a 3 feet of water, whether there is 2 inches of water, whether there is going to be 1 feet of water can be identified. Similarly, for heat wave and cold wave, we can exactly per building, we can identify depending on what is the material of that building, when it was built, what is the orientation, where it is placed, what will be the heat wave. This can help for example, a hotel, which if there is a sudden heat wave, and if you're talking about that red dot, it is very high, it is because of the way it has been built. And you will not feel the comfort of the air conditioning. But if you already know that this can happen in a simulation, you can take care of it, and therefore your clients or your customers do not complain. That can also take care of things. This is, and even your health can be taken care of. Similarly, all of us know about earthquake and fault lines, but very few people take care of lineaments or hairline fractures. Now, understanding hairline fractures can prevent landslides or buildings getting damaged in the due time. The last but not the least is most dangerous. That is sinkholes, where suddenly a area gets collapsed because the underground water has been completely extracted and there are huge holes which in time will collapse. Knowing that through an X-ray, if you can come to know it from beforehand, then you know that you should evacuate that place, or if you are looking at buying a land over there, you avoid those places. You also, if you are requiring water, if you are in industry or a factory and you know that you are taking groundwater, you come to know whether there is groundwater available in that area or not. So this is how we do the risk quantifications for tools of urban designing. So when it is applied to finance, building and infrastructure and related supply chain, accurate prediction of climate change will define the scope of changes to be expected, enable calculation of change impact on investment and operations, allow evaluation of different adaptation strategies for building, infrastructure and operations, substantially improve the long-term ROI of the investment and reduce risk of damage and failures. This approach will make investment substantially more profitable and less risky than business as usual. CAS is a sustainable design consultancy tool created to extensively capacity of the EU-based ESG and meteorological partner firms that provide climate risk impact analysis 5 and 50 years ahead. Now, who are our partners? Our partners are the government of Switzerland Meteorological Department, which has, if you understand Switzerland, they are the most accurate and their accuracy cannot be challenged. Moreover, they are partnered with the US, NASA and NOAA and the EU Space Agency. So thereby, today, we as an architectural design firm are the only architectures perhaps in the world who have our own satellites and can utilize it for, be it for the city level or for an individual project level, and tell them what the risks are. The ESG company, which is there with us, is somebody who was once a NASA scientist. He has written most of the algorithms which the world uses for measurements of climate change and weather analysis. He's also written most of the GRIs for the ESGs and the ISOs, and he is one of the co-authors of the Paris Climate Agreement, which our Prime Minister had signed. So let us look at some of the case studies of CAS. So this was done for Mumbai in 2019 to understand what will happen in 2020. We went back for 30 years, came back 1 year ahead, and what we saw was that June, July will have deficient rainfall, whereas the bar on August, the black line over here, shows that there will be more rainfall of 500 millimeters. This we understood 1 year before the things were to take place. Coming to that year, we started studying the temperatures in May, June, and we were able to understand that how the temperatures will affect, and in August, what will happen. And in August, we identified that Thursday, the 6th of August, Saturday, the 8th of August, and Sunday, the 9th of August were the most critical days where high-speed wind coupled with heavy rainfall can happen. And sure enough, on 6th of August 2020, what we saw in Mumbai was heavy rain with very high-speed winds, where the BSC buildings banner was broken, where we had a landslide at South Mumbai Pedder Road, where we had the YB Patil Stadium, you had the institutional, that also had damage. In the Nhava Sheva shipping port, we had 3 of the cranes that came down, and some of the high Tony areas of South Mumbai where we lived are places which got flooded. We have also been able to identify, and we have done it world over, be it in Zurich, be it in Tallinn, or identifying the California droughts and wildfires even before they could happen. We have been able to identify that these situations can happen. And once you are able to know things beforehand, that what can happen, you can always find precautions. This is what we try to do, and this is what is our core function in Sanjeev Goswami and Associates. And we would be very glad that should anybody want to de-risk their finance, de-risk their assets, be it residential or commercial or their supply chain, we can come in and help them both in India